Hello, this is Des from the Wellness Project, powered by Spotlight Coalition, and this is episode number 55. On today's episode, I speak with licensed mental health counselor Stacie Boyer about a very, very important topic. In today's episode, we talk all about depression. I interview Stacie about what depression really is, what the difference is between depression and sadness, and how do you know when it's time to get help, how you as a loved one can help your loved ones with their depression, as well as different techniques and tools that you can do if you yourself are struggling with depressive symptoms. I think this episode is very important, and I'm very, very pleased to have an expert such as Stacie Boyer on here to talk about it. Definitely, if you listen to any of my episodes, I think it's very important to listen to this one. Stacie gives a lot of very helpful information that everybody should know. I think you're going to find this episode to be very valuable and very informative. And I think it's very important to hear this from a licensed mental health counselor herself. I know there's a lot of information on depression, anxiety, all these different mental health illnesses. There's all this different information floating all over the internet and social media. And I think it's important to hear from the experts, which is why I try my best to bring you interviews from experts and people that have a lot of knowledge in these fields. I think it can be very damaging to get advice from people that are not qualified and don't have the experience or the expertise or the education. So I'm really happy to have Stacie Boyer on here today. Let's get into it and talk with Stacie about depression. Everyone, I'm here with Stacie Boyer. She is a licensed mental health counselor. Stacie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really excited to talk with you because I know you specialize in anxiety, depression, PTSD. So I was really interested in speaking with you about depression today.
Yes, no, sounds great. I do. I have a private practice and I specialize in depression, anxiety, PTSD, stress, using visualization, mindfulness, all that kind of stuff, as well as CBD and all kinds of good things.
Okay, great. Yeah, we actually haven't covered depression that much on this podcast as of yet. So I'm really excited to talk to you about it. Let's get started with what is your definition of depression? What exactly is depression?
Well, depression really is very common, but it is a serious mental health illness that negatively affects how we feel and how we think and how we act. And to be truly diagnosed with depression, it's something that really needs to you be feeling for 2 weeks or more. And that's really finding a big change in how you're functioning and feeling lost and loss of interest in things, loss of appetite, difficulty concentrating. But the good thing is it can be treated.
Okay, that's really good to know. So, do
Mhm.
you see that there's a difference between just regular sadness and depression then?
Absolutely, absolutely. So sadness, I mean, we're all sad sometimes, and that's certainly normal to be sad and to not feel great sometimes. But depression or major depressive disorder is certainly different from just sadness because, like we said, it lasts 2 weeks and it really changes your functioning and how you've previously functioned. Besides the depressed mood, you also potentially, like we said, could have weight change, sleep loss, loss of energy, change in the way you're eating, low concentration, and even suicidal thoughts.
Okay. And so, at what point would you say that it is time for somebody to seek professional help if they feel like they're struggling with those kind of symptoms, but they don't even realize it's depression? Maybe they just feel like they've kind of always felt that way, or they think it's just extreme sadness. They don't really take the depression seriously.
Yeah. Well, I think if you find that you really are not able to function and you really notice a change, if you are not able to kind of do your usual routine, if friends and family have mentioned it to you, or if you just really want to feel better and feel like your previous self, I always recommend therapy, of course, because I'm a therapist and I think everybody should go to therapy. I think
Yes.
it's a wonderful tool, and absolutely. If you're not feeling like yourself and you're, wondering what's going on, absolutely seek therapy. There's nothing wrong with that.
I 100% agree. And why do you think that there is such a stigma still against people going to therapy? Whenever somebody says that they're going to therapy, other people kind of like side eye them or look them in a strange way. Why do you think there's still that stigma?
Yeah, it's true. And I think there's such like embedded but outdated and antiquated thoughts. I think there are so many stereotypes related to mental health. And honestly, I think the media maybe plays a part in that. They kind of mislead and deceive individuals as to what mental illness is through the years, maybe years ago. But I think that now, because of actually people like you doing podcasts and people really talking about it more, and even famous people and celebrities and even the Olympians coming out and talking about it and having more people see it. And I think it's really going to start to destigmatize it. And I think that just speaking up when you hear, people around you making negative comments about mental health or wrong comments, being a proponent for it and speaking up for our fellow humans will help to destigmatize it. But you're right, there is still a stigma associated with it, which hopefully will lessen as time goes on, I would hope.
I hope so. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but I've noticed that there's almost less of a stigma when it comes to anxiety versus depression. Do you agree with that? Are you seeing that at all?
You know what I do? I absolutely think and I think COVID might play a role in that too, because so many people are anxious because of COVID. But you're right. Depression is sort of like that hidden, quiet, let's not talk about it. Let's put up a fake front and not let anybody know. You're absolutely right.
And I wonder where that stigma comes from with depression versus the anxiety. It definitely could be, like you said, because of COVID. A lot more people have been just saying they're very anxious, but I wonder where that comes from because I feel like with depression, you always hear like, oh, pick yourself up by your bootstraps. Oh, just feel better. Don't think about it. Go outside, clean your room. You'll feel better. Take a shower. And those aren't really things that cure depression, but you always hear those things when it comes to somebody saying that they're struggling with depression.
Yes, and that's almost like what we hear about now, the toxic positivity, which, we always kind of hear about of late, where, oh, like you said, pull yourself up and put on a fake face and all that, and you'll be fine. But the truth is that really doesn't help and sometimes makes it even worse.
And do you think that there's a difference between like a chemical imbalance kind of depression and like a situation in your life kind of depression? Like I know grief, if it goes on for a while, can turn into major depression.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that there are lots of things that can cause depression, whether it's how you were raised, if you were abused in your genes, if you are, taking certain drugs or medications. I mean, there's so many factors that come into play with depression. And then some of them are, of course, for no reason at all. I mean, it's just kind of it happens. But I think the good news is it can be helped, and it's not something that is going to be that way forever. And there are so many tools and things you can do to help, including seeking therapy if that's what you choose to do, which I think you should.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely want to get into some of those kind of coping skills, what people can do on top of therapy. So, how can depression affect somebody's relationships in their life, whether it's romantic or, with coworkers, platonic relationships, family?
Well, I think depression, affects really all relationships. An individual can feel loneliness or detachment, hopelessness, all those things. I think that even partners in the relationship can also tend to experience anxiety and depression when you're around that too. And I think it's super important for partners to kind of offer themselves self-care and provide themselves self-care if they're dealing with people with depression. But it certainly can affect all kinds of relationships.
Do you have any advice for the partners of somebody struggling with depression? I know you said a lot of self-care. Is there anything that they can do to help their partner? And, obviously they're not therapists, so they can't put themselves in that role. But is there any way that they could help their partner with their depression at all?
Well, I think the first thing probably would be to educate yourself and really understand what's going on and not, sometimes people think, oh, they're being lazy or, and they're not. Sometimes people think, they take it personally if someone's acting that way, or they think, oh, I can fix it. But that's probably not true either. So it's really educate yourself about it. And then maybe sort of see if you can identify triggers or stressors that come up that maybe make it worse or exacerbate it. Maybe also encouraging the person to seek help and being that advocate for them to help them seek help. And of course, like we have said, not to disregard your own self-care and make sure that you encourage that person to provide themselves with self-care as well.
Oh, I love that advice. And I think that's so helpful for people to hear because for those that are struggling with their partner having depression, I know they can feel really helpless and almost feel guilty, like it's something they did or they could do more to help their partner. So I like that you said that, there's nothing really that they can do to fix it and to really focus on taking care of themselves as well. I think that's super important. I've heard a lot of people kind of say that depression and anxiety are on the rise. I've heard this in different documentaries and different articles. Do you believe that to be true? And if so, why do you think that is?
Well, I think absolutely because of COVID, there's been a huge rise. And I think there's statistics, like you said, that there's like it's tripled during COVID. And I absolutely believe that. And I've seen that. And I also think, lots of times trauma and a widespread disease like COVID is a trauma on our society, could certainly cause depression, as well as grief from people that you've lost, relatives who have potentially passed away from this horrible illness, or other factors of loss like losing a job, losing your life before this, losing whatever it is. There's a lot of loss involved. And I think a lot of people really are fearful and get depressed with the thought of potentially getting sick, not being able to see loved ones. Being isolated is a really scary and depressing thing. I think the financial concerns that a lot of people are feeling when they have financial issues, they potentially could feel depressed because of that. And being social beings, we thrive on being near each other, and the fact that people have been separated and social distancing certainly can help with, or can constitute the depression. And I believe there's so many other things too, but I do see a huge rise, and I see more people coming into therapy and talking about it too, which is a good thing.
Oh, definitely. And do you work mostly with kids or adults?
Teens and adults.
Okay. Okay, great. And are you seeing that in both populations then?
I'm actually seeing teens that are home, they're homeschooled and they're kind of trapped, staring at the same four walls for 8 hours at a time, all kinds of issues stemming from COVID. It's been hard. And even seeing therapists on Zoom, they're still not getting out. But yeah, so that's been really, really difficult for that group.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know, I work in a school, so I provide mental health in schools. And I've heard, obviously a lot of teens are struggling with being home. And then, there's the issues of, a toxic home environment, things like that. But my teens that struggle with social anxiety are actually thriving. So that's kind of good to hear too. Cause yeah, I meet with them just on the computer and, we were back in person because I work with special education. And so we were in person. And so my kids that had social anxieties, a lot of anxiety, they chose to stay home and they got the best grades that they've ever gotten. And they were really happy. They said they want to continue homeschool. So that's kind of nice too. I know a lot of people are struggling, but my social anxiety kids loved it.
I guess so. That's a silver lining, and that's a positive thing. It'll be interesting to see when they do go back to school and how that kind of works. But
Yes, absolutely. It's going to be a big change, I think. So
yeah,
a year and a half.
and that, just talking about anxiety, reacclimating to the world is a huge anxiety for a lot of people. And I would imagine for that group as well, kind of getting out there again is scary.
Yes, I've been hearing that a lot. Also, with adults that are going back to work, everybody's kind of going back into the office now. And I've been seeing so many posts and just hearing from people that they're really anxious about it. So I think that a part of COVID, while there was so much loss and grief, I think people really got in touch with themselves and figured out, what works for them and what doesn't. And a lot of people worked on getting themselves healthy during that time. And some people are going to struggle coming up with going back to work too.
Yes, absolutely. But it sounds like, like you said, a lot of people have found a silver lining and gotten into shape and done other things. I mean, I've seen a lot of people listening to podcasts, for example, for the first time, and meditation podcasts or
Mm-hmm.
funny pod or whatever it is. And they found new ways and new things that they love. So that's certainly a good thing.
Oh yeah, it was great. And just seeing just on social media, I've never seen people be so creative. So that was really great to see. So I think definitely there were some silver linings, but it was a tough, going on 2 years now for sure. Before COVID, why do you think it was so many people struggled with depression? Because, obviously COVID brought on so many different issues. But before COVID, a lot of my teens were struggling with depression. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, and I think a lot of those things, like we talked about, sometimes it's in your genes or in the family that you grew up in, and like you were saying, the toxic families, and through the years of different, if you grew up in a family that was toxic, and your parents grew up in that, it's sort of like a familiar kind of thing, and the abuse in families. I think certain medications, for whatever reason, if you're on a medication, could potentially cause depression or an illness for sure. Of course, drugs and alcohol. And I think also just like we were talking about abuse, a family history, all those things play a role into that. Lots of times with teens, though, it's, their brain is still developing, and friendships and different teen angst kind of plays a part in it too. And I think that's when I talk about the cognitive behavior therapy, that's something that kind of works well in situations like that, where you kind of question your own thoughts. And I find that helps, especially I think with the teens with depression. So basically, that's, as you know, is there evidence for that thought that you're having? Is that evidence true? I love saying to them, what would you tell your best friend? If your best friend came to you with that thought, what would you say? And why are you not talking to yourself like you would your best friend? You need to be your own best friend. Other examples of, is there another way to look at that? Is there an alternative explanation as to why such and such happened? How might I look at this situation if I didn't have depression? Can I think of a way to put a positive spin on that thought or that emotion? One that teens, will this matter in 5 years? Will this matter in 1 year? Will this matter in a week? Will this even matter an hour from now? And then a lot of that kind of works with anxiety too. There's similar questions like, is this situation as bad as I'm really making it out to be? Is this really going to happen? What are the chances that this is going to happen? Let's put it into perspective, and all those things. Teaching people to question their own thoughts, because I guess we feel, we have a thought in our mind and we want to believe it. And why shouldn't we believe it? But as we grow up and become adults, we realize, well, wow, we don't really have to believe every thought that's placed in our head or popped in our head. Maybe that was put there in childhood, that necessarily isn't necessarily true. I can question it, and I can back it up with maybe three positives. And just thinking about schools, I know teachers are really taught, for every kind of negative comment they tell their students, they really should back it up with three positives to make it a change. And I tell my clients that too. Every time you have a negative thought, maybe back it up with three positives, or put those three positives in a journal. And that could potentially one kind of tool to keep in your toolkit to help with depression.
I think you're so right. We are so confident that our thoughts are correct. So I
Mm.
think our mind is so powerful. So to try to challenge that, I think is so important, difficult, but very important. I think it gets easier over time as well.
Mhm. I agree. I agree. And I think that, saying something positive certainly gets easier as well. I think it's somehow easier in the beginning to go the negative route for whatever reason, but like with practice and continued practice, going the positive road, it becomes easier and easier for sure.
Oh, yes, definitely. Are there any other methods or techniques that you use with your clients that help them with their depressive symptoms?
Yeah, I mean, I love, and we hear it all the time, but it really works, the gratitude, waking up with gratitude. There have been studies that having gratitude throughout the day as well, gratitude before you go to bed at night helps to set the tone for your day or the upcoming day. I always suggest journaling. However, not everybody loves journaling, and that's okay. I remind them that nobody has to see it. You could even rip it up when you're done with it, but journaling is certainly something that helps, challenging the negative or irrational thoughts, doing something that you enjoy, whether it's music or walking the dog or whatever. People that have depression really thrive with volunteering. Of course, when you're depressed, it's hard to, get out of bed, let alone volunteer, but it's really something to strive for and really something that helps establishing a routine, because lots of times when people are depressed, they fall out of their routine. And as humans, we kind of thrive, most of us, on a routine. So establishing that routine is easy or complex as you want it to be. I always encourage exercising. Of course, that's not, being a triathlete, but maybe just taking a walk around the block is always a good thing. Getting some fresh air, getting some sunlight and vitamin D. I'm a big proponent for sleep. And sometimes when people are truly depressed, it's they sleep way too much or they sleep way too little. So I always suggest setting an alarm and making sure you're getting that proper amount of sleep. And also the healthy eating. And of course, I'm not a dietitian and I would never tell someone what to eat, but I always kind of encourage adding, like, are you eating fruits and vegetables? Like, okay, you're having the ice cream and whatever, but make sure you're eating the fruits and the vegetables. Are you drinking enough water? Like, are you sure? Make sure you're doing those basics like drinking water and eating those healthy foods. I also love the idea of building a support network, which of course is hard if you're depressed too, but kind of having that, basically just having that toolbox of things you love. If you love listening to music, do it. If you like petting your dog, if you like taking a bath, if you like doing a face mask, if you like, whatever it is, do it. I'm also a big proponent for meditation and mindfulness, even yoga and breathing, because sometimes, yes, with anxiety for sure, but even with depression, taking those clear, big belly breaths and maybe even saying something positive when the air is in your stomach, or a mantra that you have, or something nice to yourself when you have that air in your stomach, and then slowly releasing it through your mouth. But, and of course, there's a million different meditation and grounding techniques that help as well. So those are a few ideas.
Oh, those are great. And all of them are so important. And like you said, we're social creatures. And I agree. I think people that struggle with depression thrive off of volunteering because you're forming connections, you are forming like a purpose in your life, you're helping others and, getting in touch with your community. I always recommend that as well. I think it's so, so important. So, but that is the hardest part is, getting out of bed and getting in that routine. But I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we always feel better when we're volunteering or helping someone less fortunate or at a humane society or whatever it is. So I love that one for
Oh,
sure.
definitely. Hard to get people to do it, but I always recommend it for sure.
Absolutely.
Do you have any meditation podcasts or apps that you recommend?
Well, I mean, there's so many, like the Headspace one, and I
Hmm.
mean, there's a million of them out there. Oh gosh, none that I could think of offhand. I have a podcast as well. I don't know, called
Yes.
Namaste, which I have all kinds of breathing techniques. I mean, a lot of them are for anxiety, actually, but for depression as well. And, just kind of noticing and being in the moment and the grounding, because, as you know, when we're kind of thinking of the future, that's where the anxiety sets in. And when we're thinking of the past, that's when we tend to be depressed. So the key to happiness, besides being your authentic self, is also being in the moment. So grounding is a tool that helps you be in the moment and remain in the moment where you can, potentially, hopefully be happy. But as far as, oh gosh, I wish I knew. There are a million out there,
So
so
many.
many good ones.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I always recommend Headspace too. And everyone listen to Stacie's podcast. I'm putting the link in the show notes. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when a client first comes to you, they're struggling with depression, how do you start out with them?
Well, now that everything's kind of on Zoom, I'm not back in the office, it's a little bit different. And I find that for depressed clients, it's sometimes an easier, more comfortable situation because they can be in the comfort of their home, their bed, their car, their backyard, whatever it is. Of course, like you mentioned, if they're in a toxic situation, an abusive situation, that's kind of another story. But it is a comfortable situation as long as the Wi-Fi is good and all of that kind of stuff. So we basically, we have an intake and talk to them and learn about them. Really, the beginning is just kind of getting to know each other. And then we sort of talk about different things to put in their toolbox, different cognitive behavior therapy tools that they can implement. Talk therapy, of course. I do provide them with homework, not all the time, and it's nothing that's graded or scary, but there are some kind of homework things to do to help with clients kind of getting out of that situation. Of course, I am not against medication. I mean, because with the talk therapy, having medication, it sometimes goes hand in hand for certain clients, and that's okay too. And I find a lot of clients are they don't want to take medication, or they don't want to go that route. And I assure them that it's okay and it's not a forever thing. And there's nothing wrong with that. But that with talk therapy is certainly like the best case scenario. With anxiety, for example, there's exposure therapy that's encouraged. Depression, I encourage the gratitude when you wake up, and not pushing yourself too much, maybe doing one thing and really praising yourself and being proud of yourself for accomplishing that one task, because it's baby steps with depression. It really is. Sometimes people feel guilty with the self-care, and it's encouraging them that self-care isn't selfish. This is something you need right now. Like if you broke your leg, you wouldn't be walking around the neighborhood. In the same situation, we're taking baby steps to get to healing, to feel better. It's not a forever thing. This is not going to be forever. But basically all the cognitive behavioral techniques really, really help, coupled with the homework.
Okay, great. I think that's really good for people to know because I know there's, like we said, there's that stigma. And I think a lot of people feel anxious even about going to therapy or looking into it. So I think that's good that you broke that down, what they can expect to make it less scary for people. Because when we say therapy, people get so scared and freaked out.
Yes, and I find, lots of times it's with the men, right? They come in, or anybody, but I'm just, thinking of that for an example. They come in like, oh gosh, I've never done this before, but my wife was encouraging me. And then after like the first session, they're like, this is great, and why haven't I done this before? And I could just kind of talk about myself and have someone listen, and I wish I did this sooner. And that's always what happens. They always wish
Mhm.
they would have done it sooner. So it's really a wonderful, wonderful thing, and I wish that everybody could be able to do it, actually.
Oh, absolutely. I saw that too. I worked when I was in the mental health clinic, I worked with kids and teens between 5 and 19, and most of them would come in like nervous or scared. They didn't know what to expect. And then they ended up loving it and telling me they loved it and inviting their friends to come with them to sessions. And so it's kind of funny. They come in so scared and they're like, oh, this is great.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing that's harder with the younger ones. I mean, when they come into the office, maybe there's a sand table or there's games, and you could kind of do play therapy or talk to them while their hands are busy. So the Zoom through COVID with the younger ones, I think is a little bit more difficult, but
Yes.
it's still something I super encourage.
Oh, definitely. And do you plan to go back in the office or do you plan to stay virtual?
I think eventually, because also it's, you miss that interaction too with your colleagues and all that little office stuff. But I have to say, this has been fantastic, really, all the way around. I've had not many people want to go back to the office, to be honest with you, because it's cutting down on their drive time and finding a parking spot and all that kind of stuff they don't have to worry about. So I'm finding most people really want to continue the telehealth.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. I know a lot of people were resistant to it at first, but it
Mhm.
does make sense. It's so much more convenient and you are getting those benefits anyway.
Mhm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
There are some drawbacks, like obviously you don't see the entire body language, but there are other positive things as well. So I guess what only time will tell what really happens.
Oh, definitely. And I think it makes it a little more accessible to people too. For instance, like if they don't have a car or they have to take a
Mhm.
bus or public transportation or something. I know that there's a lot of different obstacles like that. So at least it's like a
Absolutely.
little more accessible to some people.
Absolutely. Yes, for sure.
As for depression and anxiety and PTSD, do you use, because I know you said you specialize in CBT and EMDR also, right? Are there different modalities that you use for each, or do they kind of overlap that you could use them with all different like mental health issues?
Well, I live actually in an area called Parkland, Florida, which I don't know if that's sounds familiar to any of your listeners or to you, but that's where the mass shooting was at the high school down the street.
Yes.
So, yes, EMDR and also something called RTM, but EMDR was certainly used for a lot of the faculty, students, parents, whatever. Not everything is for everyone, but I had wonderful results with the EMDR. In the office, you use these little kind of tapping things, and the clients put one in each hand, and it's a bilateral stimulation, and one tapper buzzes, and then the other tapper buzzes, and you do that. Or some people use a light, or they use their finger. But on Zoom, they do the tapping. They kind of crisscross their hands in front of their chest, and their right hand on their left shoulder, and their left hand on their right shoulder, yes, and they kind of tap themselves through the process. It's a little complicated to explain, but they ultimately are kind of tapping themselves throughout it. And it seems I've had really great results with that. And that certainly is for PTSD, but PTSD comes in all forms. PTSD, of course, is the mass shooting, yes, but COVID too. I mean, especially if you're in a toxic situation or whatever it is, it doesn't have to be, a huge, massive event. If you feel PTSD for whatever reason, that's valid too. The RTM is more of a visualization kind of technique where you visualize yourself on a movie on a screen, and you play it backwards and forwards in black and white. And I know it sounds confusing, but that has worked really well with veterans. A lot of veterans come and have good results with that. The CBT is different because you're really questioning your own thoughts, and it's more of like a talk situation, where EMDR is not as much talking as CBT, if that makes sense. But yes, the
Right.
EMDR is a really interesting, wonderful tool for those experiencing PTSD.
Okay, great. And I haven't heard of RTM. That's interesting. I'll have to look into that.
Yes, yeah, I think it hasn't been around that long, but yeah, no, it's certainly an interesting visualization tool. Not everybody can visualize. Some people are like, oh, that's too hard, or I can't visualize in color, or I can only visualize in black and white. And so, you have to mix it up and change it and make it suit the person you're working with, really.
Okay, very interesting. I know that mindfulness is something that people always recommend when it comes to depression. Like you said, with the grounding is very important. So, what are the kind of benefits of mindfulness, like grounding, those kind of activities?
It works perfectly when your mind is spiraling. And I think that happens a lot, certainly with anxiety, but with depression too. You go down that rabbit hole of negativity. And grounding gets you in the moment and gets you kind of out of your thoughts, out of, like we said, thinking of the future, which is, anxiety. Oh my God, this is going to happen. What if? Oh no. And, I'm going to be living in a box on a corner somewhere, which, or the depression, which you can spiral, of course, in that direction too. So the grounding is using your five senses. This is just one example. Your five senses to get yourself in the moment. So using your vision and finding five things right in your vicinity that you can name, or you can name it out loud or in your mind. And now you're moving on to things you hear, and you're naming four things that you can hear right where you are, and three things you can smell right where you are, and two things you can touch right where you are, and potentially one thing you could taste or want to taste right where you are. And so by doing that and using your five senses, you're now in the moment, and you can start fresh there. I love meditation. Of course, lots of times people have a real difficulty meditating, and it's hard. And I think starting really slow is a great way to do it. But I also think like a nature meditative walk. So when you find yourself having those depressive thoughts and you're able to get yourself outside, for an example, if your thought starts to wander where something you don't want it to, immediately focus on something in nature, like focus on the bird, focus on the cloud, focus on the tree. And then when you find your mind again, focusing on something else in nature. And like with meditation, you think of the thought as the train coming in the station. Okay, there it is. And now I'm going to let it go. And so it's just kind of letting it go.
Okay.
which is
Good
easier
to
said
know.
than done, like
Oh,
most
absolutely.
things.
Yes, I am one that struggles very much with meditation. I try, but it's very hard for me, but I think I'm getting better with it over time.
I think that is hard. And that's in the, giving yourself that grace and saying, okay, I'm going to do it for 1 minute today and that's it. And tomorrow maybe I'll do it for 3 minutes and eventually I'll build myself up to 10 minutes and that's okay.
Yes. Great. Well, Stacie, this has been so great talking with you. Do you have any final words of advice or wisdom for our listeners that may be struggling with depressive or anxiety symptoms?
First of all, it was so nice of you to have me, and I'm so happy to be here with you and everybody who's listening. But I would encourage you to get help if you need it. It's not scary. It's wonderful. It's almost like, a massage for your back or your body. You're getting kind of like a massage for your mind. And that's really a special, wonderful thing. I think I also want to encourage the gratitude because that's something anyone could do wherever you are. Just finding something, and some days are harder than others, but finding something to be grateful for. And the journaling, just getting those thoughts out there. And if you're not a journaler, maybe you're an artist and kind of drawing a picture of how you're feeling and then turning the page and moving on. And of course, the meditation and the visualization is certainly helpful too.
Very helpful. And I love that suggestion that if you're not a writer to draw or something like that, I love that idea. That's really great.
Oh, good. Yes.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Stacie. Everyone, I'm putting all of Stacie's social media in the show notes. Definitely go find her, follow her, listen to her podcast. Thank you so much, Stacie.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Stacie, for coming on the show today to speak with me about such an important topic. I hope that you all learned a lot from this episode and learned a lot from Stacie. And I hope that you also leave this episode with a lot of knowledge and hope for yourself and your loved ones that are struggling with depressive symptoms. This is something that can be helped either by going to therapy or with medication or both. If you are struggling with depressive symptoms, please seek out help from a professional. You can, if you have health insurance, you can call your health insurance and they will refer you to a therapist. If not, there are a lot of low cost services. There's nonprofit mental health clinics, and they will do fees on a sliding scale according to your income. If you're struggling and having a hard time, please seek out support. I will put links in the show notes of where you can find support, as well as different hotlines that you can call if you're needing help. If you are looking to follow Stacie and her expertise, all of her links are also in the show notes. You can find the detailed show notes at accordingtodez.com/55. And again, that is accordingtodez.com/55, episode 55. If you liked this episode, check out episode number 50, where I interview Amanda Ferret and we talk all about self-care, which Stacie and I talked about in this episode. I think self-care is very important. I actually have a course coming out on self-care, so that'll be up in the next few months, and I will let you know all about that. So tune into these episodes and join my email list. A link to join that will be in the show notes. That's where you will find all up-to-date information on everything that's coming out. I also have a lot of journals coming out and notebooks and things like that. So a lot of great stuff coming out. So definitely keep in the loop. Follow me on all social media. All the links are in the show notes. So again, go to accordingtodez.com/55 for all the detailed show notes, the helplines, where to find Stacie, where to stay up to date with my different offers. So until next week, I hope you have a wonderful, peaceful week.